If you recognize this bag, that means you follow me on Instagram. I can't believe how much response I've gotten off of that video post. And so many people have requested a sew along or a sewing tutorial and a sewing pattern, so I am doing both. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through step by step on exactly how I made the bag. I'm going to talk about the fabric first. So this is a canvas that I bought at my local Joann Fabrics, and it's labeled as duck canvas. They have several colors, but this one really stood out to me and I absolutely loved it, and apparently a lot of you also love this color. One thing I am going to say, it being a fabric and not being a vinyl, you may want to put some protective spray on it if you really don't want it to get dirty, but you'll have to do some research on that because those have a lot of chemicals in them. So I have a piece of fabric that's left over from making the bag, and I did measure it. It will be enough to make another bag. So I'm excited about that I can use the same thing. I'm gonna walk you through on how to make an adjustable shoulder strap, and it is optional. If you don't want it, that's fine, you can skip that. The bag also has a couple of dividers inside, and those are also optional. If you don't want to add those, that's totally fine. So once I get to that part of the construction process, I'll mention that again and let you know where you can skip to if you want to leave out the dividers. All right, let's get started. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to apply fusible interfacing to all of the pieces that need to be interfaced. For this project, I'm using Ellen's number 809 Decor Bond fusible interfacing. And you can see the shiny side is where the glue is. So we're going to apply that with the wrong side of the fabric facing up and the glue side against the fabric. And follow the instructions specific for whatever fusible interfacing you're using. But in this case, I'm using a lot of steam and a lot of heat. And I just want to point out that I am lifting the iron slightly as I'm moving it, so I'm not dragging it on the interfacing, but I'm making sure that I applied plenty of steam to make sure that everything adheres correctly. Always double check your pieces, make sure you didn't miss any spots. And now we're going to do this to all of the other pieces that need to be interfaced. We're basically going to follow the same process. So here we go. Okay, notice here that for the zipper tabs, the interfacing is smaller than the actual fabric piece, and that's because we're not going to interface the seam allowances. We do this to reduce the bulk in that particular area. The other pieces that are fully interfaced, we want that strength in those seams because as you're using the bag, those seams are going to have a little bit more stress. But in this case here for the zipper tabs, we really don't need all that bulk. So that's why you see a difference in the size of the interfacing for these pieces. Here are the rolled handles, and you're going to notice that the interfacing is also smaller. The only area we really need reinforced is right in the middle of the fabric piece, because the edges that we're going to be folding into that middle area don't really need to be reinforced, and it's going to reduce the bulk, making it a lot easier to sew. When you're aligning that interfacing piece, just look for your notches that represent the middle of that fabric strip and make sure that you align the middle of your interfacing with that notch. Now we're ready to work with the shoulder strap. Now if you recall, the strap sometimes needs to be cut into pieces if your fabric is not wide enough or you don't have enough fabric where you can place the pattern on the fold. But again, we're going to line this small piece of interfacing along those notches because we're only interfacing the middle area of the shoulder strap. Okay, here are my pieces for my dividers that go inside the bag, and I'm using a heavy cotton fabric. It's a little lighter than what the outside is, and this is a medium weight interfacing, and again, it's a fusible interfacing. The only area we're interfacing is the very inside area. We're not interfacing the seam allowances because again, we want to reduce any bulk unless it's absolutely necessary to be reinforced. Okay, now we're ready to start sewing. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to cover the end of our zipper, and essentially we're creating a zipper stop. So here's our fabric. What we're going to do is we're going to lay the fabric behind the zipper, and we're going to overlap each side, covering the zipper tape. You can pin this in place if it makes it easier to manipulate. All right, now we're going to stitch across the top here. And I'm using a 3/8 inch seam allowance here. Now we're going to turn the fabric to hide that seam. And we're going to fold along each side. And you can either press it with your iron to give it a nice crisp edge, or just finger press it if your fabric creases easily. And then we're going to fold that under, and you can use 3/8 or 1/2 inch, whatever you want here. Once you fold that under, now we're going to fold it again to cover that piece there. So essentially we're folding it onto itself. And let me go ahead and put a couple of pins here. And now we can stitch all the way around the edges to secure it in place. And just like that, our zipper end is covered and we have a zipper stop. All right, let's move on to the next step. Moving on to the zipper tab. The way to do this is we're going to fold each short end about 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to press everything in place. We're basically creasing all of the folds to make it easier to stitch because it's rather narrow. Now we're going to take the piece and fold it in half, long sides together, and we're going to press that edge. And always be careful with the steam and the heat. You can use a little pointy awl or something to hold it so you don't get burnt. Now we take the raw edges on that long edge and we're going to bring them into that middle crease, right up to that crease, and press it. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And you can finger press it a little bit to hold it in place. All right, once we get all those sides done, now we bring our wonder clips. These are really, really good to have. And we're going to make sure that we tuck in those edges so that they look nice and neat from the outside. Bring them together and just start clipping everything together so that when you bring it to the sewing machine, all you have to do is remove the clips and start sewing. Okay, we're ready to sew. I'm going to sew along all 4 sides to secure everything in place, and I typically like to start in the middle just to make it a little bit easier because it can be a little thick, and you can use anything sharp to tuck in those ends if they start coming out of that little tiny folded area. Make sure that you use the hand wheel to pivot and turn your piece. You want your stitches to be nice and neat. And here is your little piece that you can start folding the end of to insert into your actual zipper tab. And you can make this a little bit thinner if you like. I do like this width, even though it gets a little hard to insert it, because I like the substance of it when I'm opening and closing my bag. And again, if you feel more comfortable clipping these ends together to help you maneuver, then use another Wonder clip to hold everything in place. Now we have a couple of options. We can put a stitch here and then leave everything else open, and it just gives it a nice open area, or you can stitch all the way around and then just have that as one piece. I prefer to just close the entire thing, so I'm going to very, very slowly, because again, this ends up adding a little bit of thickness, and whenever I have to, I just use my hand wheel and just turn the needle by hand very, very carefully, especially in areas that are so small underneath your presser foot. Just go very slowly. Now we're gonna reinforce this a little bit, and there it is. One thing I forgot to mention, always use a safety pin at the end of your zipper to prevent that slider from coming off. It's happened to me before, so trust me, this is a good tip. This is the part where the zipper is going to be installed, and this is going to be attached to the facing. Alright, so I've already pressed under one short end of each zipper tab on the fabric side, and I've done the same on the lining side. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of the lining pieces with the right side facing up, and we're going to lay the zipper on top. So I've marked my lining piece where my 3/8 inch seam allowance corner is. Now I'm going to align that curve with my marking, and I'm going to pin it in place. And then I'm going to pin my zipper to the lining with the lining's right side facing up and my zipper also facing up. The other thing I want to mention is this is a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and notice how wide my tape is. That's probably a good 5/8. You want to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance because you want there to be a space between the teeth and the actual fabric once we're done. And now I'm going to stitch this in place all along there. Okay, now that we have the zipper attached to the lining, again, the lining right side facing up, the zipper also right side facing up. Now we're going to bring in one of the fabric pieces. Again, the folded end goes on this side towards the end of the zipper to match the folded edge of the lining. And now I'm going to lay the fabric piece on top of the lining and the zipper with the lining and the fabric piece right sides facing each other. And I'm basically going to pin this, and I'm going to sew the short end, and I'm going to sew along this edge, which is the one I previously stitched on the lining side. I'm going to pin it, making sure that my folded edges match. So let me go ahead and show you what that's going to look like. Making sure that my lining and my fabric pieces, or the raw edges, are even. Okay, once we have that all pinned, again, we're going to stitch the short side and the long edge. We're going to leave this folded edge open, no stitching, and we're not going to stitch this edge either. So let's go ahead and get that done. Now we want to trim a little bit of that excess, get that bulk out of the way. And we turn it inside out, pushing the fabric very carefully, making sure you don't rip a hole in it. And your zipper, once it's closed, let me go ahead and get that out of the way, will look like this. And here's your zipper tab, and the lining is on the other side. So I'm going to give this a good press, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so I'm trying to get a good angle so that you can see exactly what I did here. So this is the side that we've already taken care of, and now I've pinned the lining to the other side of the zipper the same way, making sure that the folded edge of my lining matches where I have the other side. And now I'm going to stitch the lining to the zipper tape. Up all the way. Again, the same way that I did the other side, I'm going to lay the fabric on top with the lining and the fabric right sides together, matching all of my raw edges. And now I'm going to stitch along that line and this short edge here. Now we're ready to do a little bit of a top stitch on all three sides, making sure that we capture this folded edge. And this folded edge was left open because we have an extended piece on the zipper. So in order to turn this over to the right side, we need this open here. So now we're gonna go ahead and close it. All right, so let's edge stitch the short end, the long end, and the short folded end. And there is my top stitching, nice and even. So we're going to go ahead and do the other side. There it is. All right, so now we move on to attaching this to our facings. These are my facings, and that's going to get attached to the zipper tabs. So as you can see, my facings have notches right in the middle, as well as my zipper tabs. So those notches are gonna match. With right sides together, we're gonna pin our facing to the zipper tab, and we're gonna stitch 3/8 of an inch, and we're gonna do this on both sides. Okay, right sides together, matching notches. And if it makes it easier, you can open up the zipper just so that you can handle your pieces a little bit better. Alright, so now we close the zipper, and here are my facings. Okay, so this is what my zipper tab area looks like. It's now attached to my facings. Now we're going to put this aside for now, and we're going to start working on the lining part, including attaching the pocket and the zipper for that pocket. Okay, now we're going to mark the area where the zipper is going to be installed on the lining of the bag. And we're making these quick markings using the little holes that I punched on the pattern. You can use an awl or something sharp to make those holes. And we're just basically going to lightly mark those areas because we're going to interface that area with a very lightweight interfacing. We're doing this because we're going to be using that zipper a lot. It's inside the bag, and we're going to be reaching in and out, and you want to reinforce the lining so that when we install the zipper in the pocket bag, it can handle all that stress on those seams. Now that the interfacing is on, now we mark a little bit more with a darker pencil or pen the actual markings that we're going to use as stitching lines when we're ready to install the zipper and the pocket bag. If the markings are not that visible, then you can just kind of go ahead and darken those a bit. Now we're going to use a ruler, and we're going to connect all of those dots until we get the markings and the shape exactly the way that it's marked on your pattern. All right, and we're almost done, and I'm gonna zoom in so you can see it. Okay, so we're gonna work on our pocket bag. Here is the lining for one of our panels. I've interfaced it. I've already shown this in a previous step. I've interfaced the pocket area, and I've made my markings using my pattern. Here is my pocket bag. I've basically made the same thing, made the markings, and the reason why I do this is because I'm going to put these two pieces right sides together, and I'm gonna align those markings so that they match. So I kind of start with one corner on one side, and then the corner on the other side, and line that up. Do the same thing with the other corner. Line that up. Now we have my pins here and my pins here. And then I do the same thing on the other side. All right, once we have those lined up, I have my lining, my bag, my pocket bag, right sides together, and now I'm going to stitch along the outer box, and I'm going to use probably a 2.5 stitch length. I want my stitches to be really small. Basically what I'm doing is I'm making an outline stitch because I'm going to slash from this little corner here, this middle line, and then I'm going to cut into these lines here to create a little triangular tab so that when I turn everything inside out, it forms a little window for my zipper. So let's go ahead and get the stitching taken care of first. And it basically doesn't matter where you start. I like to start kind of in the middle, that way I don't have to take my pins out quite yet. All right, let's get this done. If you want, you can make your stitching even smaller as you get close to the corners. Take out your pin. And then once you get away from the corner, take it back to 2.5. Alright, now that I've made my stitching, now I'm going to cut the line and my little triangles. And I'm going to be very careful doing that because I want to cut up to the stitching, but I don't want to cut through the stitching. So I like to fold it here first, make a little snip, and then I start cutting. And cut right to the stitching, but be careful not to cut through the stitching. Go to the other side, right up to the stitching, being careful. And now I'm going to take my pocket and I'm going to put it in through the opening so that I'm putting the pocket bag inside the lining. And it's gonna basically look, let's see if I can get this done before pressing so that you can see it. See how we have a little window, and now our zipper is going to go in there. But before I do that, I'm gonna take this over to the iron and I'm gonna give it a nice press and get those edges nice and crisp. Okay, once the lining is pressed, this is what it's gonna look like. Here's your little window for your zipper, and we're going to stitch the zipper behind this. Now, this is what it looks like on the other side. Everything is nice and pressed. There are a couple of ways you can do this. One way is you can use steam a seam. It's basically, let me show you what it is. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. It's a tape that it's sticky on one side. It has a little bit of a paper backing on that other side. You stick it on whatever you're applying it to. Then you use your iron and you put a little bit of heat on it. It melts that glue onto the fabric, in this case the zipper, and then you pull the paper backing off, and then you put that against the other fabric, press it, and it just basically glues both fabrics together. The only thing about that is you have to be careful not to put the glue anywhere where your needle is going to stitch, because you're going to get a lot of that glue onto the needle. So what I prefer to do instead is I take my zipper and I line it up to where there's extra zipper on both sides. And then I put just a temporary pin on this side. And now what I do is I go on the other side and I pin the edges exactly where I want them. Now I pin my opening on my zipper tape exactly where I want my zipper to be. So it's gonna look a little bit like this. I'm trying to get this into a good angle for you to see. All right. Now the other thing you could do is once you pin this in place, you can, which I think that's what I'm gonna do, just to show you a good option if you don't want to buy the steam a seam, or you're afraid that it's going to get all over your machine. You can baste this in place. Put a long basting stitch on it to hold it in place, and then just carefully stitch it in place with your sewing machine. All right, so basically that's what it's going to look like once it's done. And now you have your zipper opening. That's your pocket. Okay, so I have basted my zipper in place, and I used red thread just so that you can see it. I hope that shows well on camera. All right, so basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to top stitch fairly close to that fabric edge all along this opening, and that's going to stitch the zipper in place. I am going to change my presser foot to, you can use either a zipper foot or a very narrow foot, which is what I'm going to do. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, I've changed my presser foot to my narrow foot, and I'm going to end up top stitching about 1/8 of an inch away from the fabric edge. I'm basically just going to use the edge of my presser foot along the edge of my fabric and keep that distance all the way around. Here we go. Now at this point, I'm going to open up my zipper, which is why I like to baste, because it'll hold my zipper in place. So I'm going to make sure my needle is in the down position, lift my presser foot, and just open the zipper, and now continue on stitching. As I get close to the other side, I'm going to close my zipper, needle in the down position, lift up my presser foot, close my zipper, and here we go. There's my zipper. I'm gonna go ahead and take my basting stitches off, and then I'm gonna finish off my pocket bag. Basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold this up and I'm gonna match my edges of my bag, and then I'm gonna pin it all in place, and I'm going to stitch all 3 sides to close the bag, and I'll show you how I do that next. Okay, so I have pinned the edges of my pocket bag together, and the easiest way to do this is just to fold the actual lining piece out of the way and stitch it on this side here all the way around the 3 sides. Now, one thing I want to caution you, when you get to this side here, this little zipper stop made out of metal, make sure that you're not stitching over that. So you can use any seam allowance you want. I usually do about 1/4 inch, and so if I do 1/4 inch, then I will most likely miss that little metal piece. Once I get to this area here, I'll stitch very slowly just to be sure that I miss that area. All right, I'll start here at the bottom, and I'll just use the edge of my zipper foot as a guide, because the seam allowance here doesn't matter. It's gonna be inside the bag, nobody's gonna see it. All right. Again, when I get to this area, here's that metal piece. So I'm gonna be very careful. You can almost do it by hand just to be sure you're gonna miss it. Go all the way to the top, about, again, 1/4 inch. Turn your fabric and stitch just the pocket bag. Again, it doesn't matter the seam allowance, you just want to close it all up. Okay, turn your fabric, get your lining out of the way, and finish stitching this side. The metal piece is already extended, so I don't have to worry about it. And that's it. Now you have your lining piece with your zipper and your pocket bag, and basically you open your zipper and there is your bag. Nice. Now, just a quick tip on a piece like this, both the zipper and the fabric for this pocket bag is a great opportunity to use some upcycled materials. You can take a small piece of fabric of either something upcycled or some scraps and literally make the bag out of that fabric. You can even make this out of a contrast color and add a little pop of color inside the bag that only you know about. All right, so let's move on to the next step. Now that we have our pocket complete and our zipper attached, we have our top zipper panel and facings all put together. Now we're going to finish the lining, and we're going to attach that to our top zipper tabs and facing panels. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to close the bottom part of our front and back lining panels. The way we do that is, this is our bottom here, and you're going to have 2 notches. This is our opening. We need to leave this opening because this is what we're going to use to turn the bag inside out once we're done. So we're going to pin that together, matching notches. And now we're going to finish the bottom piece by just stitching from the edge here to the first notch, and then this notch to the very end. Okay, now that we've sewn our bottom seam and we have our opening, everything is pressed nice and neat. Now before we move on to attach the lining to the facing and the zipper tab, we're going to attach the dividers. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, the inside dividers are optional. If that's something that you rather skip, then you can fast forward this part of the video and just move on to the part where I am attaching the lining to the facing and zipper tab. But if you want to add the dividers, let me show you how you make the dividers and attach them to the lining. Okay, here are my dividers, and I've already applied the inner facing to them. And you're going to see that they have these notches, one at each side, one here and one here. That's the area where you're going to fold. And now you're going to pin this other edge. I pressed my seams open, and now I'm going to turn this inside out. And right on my stitching line, I'm going to press this nice and flat and give a nice crisp edge to this other side here. Okay, here are the finished dividers, and the seam is going to go towards the bottom of the handbag, and the sharp pressed edge is going to go towards the top, and this is where our top of the bag is. So we're going to pin the divider to one of the lining pieces, and make sure that you take your pocket bag and move it out of the way so that you don't stitch over it accidentally. And you're going to have your notches here. One of the notches, which in this case it's this one here, is labeled placement line for the divider, and then the one that's right below that or next to it, that's where we're going to pivot when we stitch the side panels to the bag. So we're going to line up this edge of the divider to that notch, that first notch here, if you're looking at it from the top of the bag. So I'll go ahead and use a wonder clip for that, or you can use pins. This is not as thick. And you're just going to pin everything in place. Go ahead and use some pins here, making sure that you have the edge of your divider matching that notch. All right, and then you're going to do the same thing on the other side, lining everything up. Here are my two notches, and this notch here is the one that we're going to match to that edge.